chair of the committee, is experiencing his last meeting tonight. And I just want to say, yeah, you're done right now. And I just want to say thank you for your service. It has been a pleasure working with you, and we obviously wish you the best at your next meeting. And I've had the pleasure in this position as chair over the last 6.5 years, or I guess it's almost 7 years now, of working with a lot of great people in Albany who are interested in public service, both in their day job and in their small amounts of spare time in the evening. And I look forward to the new members of the board that will be coming on, and I think are being discussed by the Common Council and caucus right now as we meet. So thank you, Denard. Best of luck in your new position, and sorry you're leaving the board, but everybody moves on.
Yeah, best wishes.
Thank you, guys. Thank you. It's been like, as I said to you guys before, it's been a great experience working with you all. Like, I've learned a lot in a very short amount of time, and it has been a pleasure working with you guys and for the citizens of the city of Albany. So, thank you.
Thank you. Luis,
I missed where you were going. Do you want to share that? Are you leaving the fair city, or are you just on to different things?
I am actually. I'm headed to Chicago, so I will be relocating to Chicago in a very near.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, congratulations. Chicago's a fun town. So.
Yeah.
Great architecture. You should get on the zoning board there too, Denard.
Wait, transitioning there in the middle of the winter, though. That's going to be the fun part.
Yeah, that'll be a little challenging. I thought maybe if I ever lived in Chicago, like my last name would get me places, but I went to visit. Nobody cared. You'll do awesome there. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wait till the next daily is mayor, Martin, and then head on out there.
Yeah, just.
Here's another crop. Okay, Luis, you want to get us started?
Yep. So we have, for new business, the first case is 1415 Washington Avenue. This is an area variance to allow 107-foot setback. Oops. Where 10 feet is the maximum permitted. And presenting, we have Dan Hirschberg, and there are a couple of co-panelists. So I'll just allow Dan Hirschberg. And then if you have any additional people that need to speak at any time, just let me know and I'll unmute them. One moment, please. All right, and Dan, you should be unmuted.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
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 Proceed, Mr. Hirschberg.
My name is Daniel Hirschberg. I'm a member of the firm Hirschberg & Hirschberg in Albany, New York, and I'm here today representing 1415 Washington Avenue Property, LLC. They are proposing to demolish the Crest Hill Suites Hotel, a 95-room hotel, and build a student dormitory. In order to do that, we are asking for a variance from 10 feet maximum front setback to allow 107-foot front setback. Louise, could you go to the next slide? This is the aerial photo of the existing site. I think you folks have seen it before. This is Washington Avenue. This is one way in, one way out. People leave, they go down in front of the Dunkin' Donuts to the traffic light down there. And this is a site plan. Listening into the, you can go to the next slide, Louise, that's fine. Listening in at the discussion, there was some confusion about what are the remnants of the Mohawk Hudson Railroad bed in here. Having been involved in the original project where we had this area declared a archaeological easement, I can tell you that there were virtually no artifacts left in that site. There were a few bolts found, a few stems of pipes, and a few buttons from coats, but there was no real remnants of the track there. There was some pockets of ballast, which showed how they used to put the railroad ties in. They didn't ballast the whole area and put the ties on top. They made little pockets of stone ballast at 2 points on a tie and ran the tie across it. That was found out for the first time by this excavation. So the excavation did some new work. Next, Louise. This is the deed of the easement. And the easement is in favor of the city of Albany. So the city of Albany has the rights to that easement.
It's not a private easement then.
It's not a private easement. It's an easement granted by the developer at the time, which is 886 Western Avenue Associates LP, which the principal was Peter Gullo, who was the developer of a lot of the property out here. He is since deceased. But the city of Albany has the rights to that easement. I guess rights and obligation for that easement. And the goal there was just to maintain it so that it can remain in its current position. And it was also remains of an aqueduct that ran from the 6 Mile Waterworks down to the reservoir at Manning Boulevard is the reservoir it actually ran to. And remnants of that were found too. Next, Louise. And this is the map I showed last time. We were allowed to cross it in here. The limits of disturbance easement will be limited to the area of the existing crossing, which is like here and a little piece here. This shows there was a remnant. There's a structure here that was over the aqueduct, which is a brick aqueduct that ran all the way from 6 Mile Waterworks up at this end, all the way down to the east. And remnants of it existed all the way down through Melrose Avenue and those streets and this railroad easement, but all of that has since been destroyed and occupied by dwellings and streets. Next. The remains of the cultural resources were identified. So we actually did had a field reconnaissance, including seeker parts 1 and 3. 1 and 3 is recovery of items. They identified items and then recovered them. And it determined that the Mohawk-Hudson Railroad is eligible to be on the National Register. The remains of the 6 Mile Waterworks Aqueduct does not appear to be on the National Register, and that was confirmed by SHPO. Next. This is extras from the report on archaeological potential. It talks about the cultural resource survey. It is all this the only remains intact of the first railroad. So again, it's important for that purpose. It was built in 1831, but meanwhile, I think I said before, when they determined that the route that they had was required them to go up the hill at Morton Avenue wasn't suitable for the rail, so they had to pull it up with horse carts all the time. So they relocated it to the area where the New York Central Railroad was, and now is the CSX Railroad site is where it was relocated to. And the artifacts recovered have revealed archaeological facts not previously documented, and what that was the construction techniques. Next. And the 6 Mile Waterworks carried the water for the 6 Mile Waterworks at Fuller Road, and it went down to the Beaker Reservoir. This was actually the first piping of stuff, although there was a small previous system that went from Van Rensselaer Reservoir in the town of Colony, but I don't want to talk about that tonight. Next. This is the view of the archaeological easement berm west of the driveway. And you can see it's elevated. It goes into trees there. And it goes all the way down to the fence under I-90. When they built I-90, they removed a large portion of it, that berm. This is the historical plaque. It was meant to be affixed to a stone. I think it got unaffixed at a time. The applicant is willing to refix it. It's still in good shape, and it has text that was agreed upon with SHPO. And this is the view of the archaeological easement east of the driveway, and that is right in the area. The wall separates the driveway from that. Next. So what we're asking for here, we compared it to USDO requirements. Every other requirement we meet quite easily. The maximum impervious coverage is 90, we're at 55.4. The one we don't meet is 10 foot is 107 feet. All the other requirements under USDO are met. Next, please. And this shows, this identifies, this green area would be the only area available for construction. It's 2,884 square feet, bounded by the archaeological easement. This is a sewer easement, which means that we couldn't build it 10 feet from the right of way because the sewer easement is 15 feet wide. But again, the green line starts at 15 feet back and stops at the archaeological easement, and then it's 2,884 square feet. Next. If in fact we're to build something equivalent to the principal use, which in this case would be student housing, we'd be limited to a building that it would be 60 feet wide by 28. Why do I use 60 feet? Because people that are familiar with multifamily housing projects, is a multiple of 60 feet is almost always used because it's a double-loaded corridor. You have a corridor and units on both sides. It gives you enough space for units on both sides of the corridor. So something between 58 and 62 feet is the norm for these units. So we put in a 60-foot wide building. It would have to stop at 28-foot deep, stop by the archaeological easement. So if in fact we did this with a center corridor, we could have 2 units on this floor, and based upon a number of floors. If we went above 1 floor, a portion of each floor would have to be taken up with elevators, stairs, and elevator lobby, et cetera. So the units would be even smaller. I represent the fact is that this would not be a reasonable use of the site, and it causes a significant hardship for the developer to be forced to put a principal use on that. Next. Compared to front setbacks, I took the average of all the sites starting at 1365 to 1475. That's all the buildings that exist in that area. And they average 105.4 feet. Meanwhile, the only one that was built after the USDO was adopted was 1385, which is 50 feet back. But all the rest of them were built prior to USDO being adopted. We think there's some public benefits for the project. The 95-room Crystal Suites will be based with a vibrant student community for up to 560 students. We'll have area there. We'll be able to have encourage bicycle use by our residents. And we also tend to participate in the 2019 Washington Avenue Bethune Creek Corridor Study, which identified a number of improvements to Washington Avenue to assist with pedestrian and vehicular passage of the site, and also strongly revolves around bicycle traffic. We haven't quantified it yet, but we made it clear to Bill Trudeau, and we submitted the traffic study, which identifies our participation in that, where we could work it out with Bill Trudeau to find a proper level of participation. Next. And this is a larger area photo showing the area. That's our blue area. The nearest building on SUNY side, because theoretically, even though SUNY is exempt from our standards, the corridor normally would have the same setback on both sides. The nearest building is 530 feet back. So, consideration on impact of the corridor is the corridor as constructed were fairly consistent with the development of the area. Next. The definition of dormitory was requested at the last meeting. This is the definition of a dormitory. And as pointed out, it requires to be a duly registered student in any accredited school, college, or university, the spouse of such students, or a management employee, or an employee or trainee of a medical or technical institution. The operative facility will require that any proposed tenants provide proof of that with a current student card or an employee card, or with a letter from HR people saying that they are employed at those facilities. Next. I'm going to turn it over now to Andre. If you could activate Andre Barros from SAR Architects, and he'll lead the rest of the discussion.
Okay, Andre, you should be muted, or unmuted rather.
I believe I'm unmuted. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dan, for the introduction. I think you've hit really the key salient points. What I wanted to talk about was just kind of everything behind the archaeological easement. So our intention was to keep the existing curb cuts, keep the road through the archaeological easement and the water easement, and not disturb anything beyond what was historically disturbed. I think we're technically making it a little bit smaller just because we're coming out of the north side differently. But from the archaeological easement to the road, we're not disturbing things. Once you enter the site, just a quick walkthrough of the project. The intention is that we really want to drive vehicular traffic out of the picture as quickly as possible. So there's a quick left turn to parking, which is underneath the building. So you'd enter the site and make a turn and then go either up a jump ramp or down a jump ramp or a speed ramp into the parking garage, which is underneath the student housing. There is then a service road that runs to the back of the property, which is primarily for fire truck access. It would also be used for move in and move out to accommodate the sort of peak traffic demand. And it could be used for deliveries and trash and things like that. But the bulk of traffic will be directed immediately into the garage. Beyond that, the building is oriented as sort of two wings of student housing around a central courtyard. This is laid out to maximize the efficiency of the site and also to work with the grade of the site. So there is a slope of the site back from the street towards I-90, and the building is responding to that and to just kind of working with the natural geometry of a very awkward site. We're calling, the sort of courtyard area is an open gathering space for students. It's a front lawn. It could be used however they want, from frisbee to studying to nothing, right? It could be empty. And then in back, we have an outdoor deck area, which is raised also on top of parking. The intention was to really hide the parking as much as possible and maximize the amount of the site being used for student purposes. Along I-90, and actually, if we want to advance the slides, we can hit a few more points here. So here's really quickly that point of keeping the existing foreground, even to the extent of matching the current sign location with a new sign, right? That there isn't any benefit in disrupting what's functioning there. And as Dan pointed out, we can't get a lot of value out of putting things in the front yard. We'd prefer to build up to the street. We understand the purpose of building a corridor like that. It just isn't feasible to put a token building in that foreground. And then here what you see is that the intention is to hold the edge as much as practical, right? That once we get past that archaeological easement, we are designing to an urban edge. And then breaking that as a way of wayfinding to invite people in and to make it obvious that you can enter the site into that courtyard. And you can get a tiny glimpse all the way through to the trees by I-90 through that pass through for fire trucks at the back. Next slide, please. So here, the before and after, kind of the fundamental shift that happens between the existing building and our building is the existing building is pushing parking to the edge to maximize surface parking, and we are pushing the student housing to the edge to maximize student space. So it's kind of an inversion of the current topology on the site. And then that creates the sheltered courtyard, again, sheltered from busy streets like Wash Avenue and I-90, and also sheltered from the elements, and just giving students kind of a secure space there. when they're home. The other advantage of keeping the circulation is that when students exit the site, they can follow that existing road, not on our property, but there's that existing parallel road or service drive parallel to Washington that takes you towards the Dunkin' Donuts. So they can circulate there or on the sidewalk to get to the crosswalk and cross light at the front door of the University of Albany. So hopefully our site is positioned to make it really easy for students to move in a safe path on the I-90 side of Washington until they can get to a safe crossing and not shortcut across. If we look at the next slide, here's just a really quick section to explain how we're taking advantage of the grade to squeeze 2 levels of parking in underneath the first floor of the building. So, or sorry, underneath the second floor of the building. So the height from level 1 to level 2 is dictated by fire truck access to the I-90 side of the property. Based on that height, which has to be very high to accommodate a fire truck, roughly 15 feet, that was enough room that if we dug down to the lower grade on site, we could fit 2 levels of parking in there, which we're doing in order to hit a reasonable parking number. If we go on to the next slide. Here we are on the I-90 side. The question came up that, you know, I-90 is a very prominent exposure of the property and approach. As Dan pointed out, a lot of trees were in a previous version of this presentation. Dan pointed out that a lot of trees were added along I-90 to hide the existing retaining wall that's there. We intend to reuse that existing retaining wall. And so a lot of the vegetation, which was already established here to hide previous projects, will again benefit this project. And it's going to be visible, obviously, as you're moving. Here, since it wasn't obviously safe to stand on the highway and take pictures, we used Google Street View pictures, which actually is kind of a very realistic way of, you know, from a vehicle, how you would experience the project. The next slide will show the other direction. So here you are in the opposite bound lanes, and if you take one step back in Google Earth behind where this view is taken, the building is completely obscured by trees, and it looked like we were trying to hide it. So we found the view that gave us the most exposure of the building. So as you move along the highway, again, using Google Earth, we didn't stand out there, but this particular shot showed the most of the building that you will ever see from that exposure. Next slide. Thank you. Here's just a couple snapshots of where we are with the current development of the project. On the right, you see that sort of courtyard space. The amphitheater on the right is there to address grade changes. There is, you know, a 10-foot drop across the site, and so that's one way we're solving for that. On the left, you can see how along the I-90 side, the grade drops down enough that the parking garage, which is below grade on the Washington side, pops out and is above grade on the highway side. In full transparency, there is the mezzanine level of parking is open air, and then the lower level is enclosed. And that's kind of intentional to create a break between the parking garage and the building above. However, you know, we've seen what happened at other projects in the area, and so we are minimizing that to an architecturally appealing sort of horizontal zipper and not a gaping hole in the building. Also, on the going back to the right side, the glass element in the foreground, which is going to continue to evolve as we get into the interiors of it, but that is the front door leasing lobby area. And again, from a safety perspective, that's going to be lit the most frequently of all the spaces in the building. So from the street, you're going to see that as a easy wayfinding element to understand where you enter the building, and also to just provide safety, you know, for this whole courtyard experience. Next slide. I think that's it. Any questions? Or Dan, did you want me to do the summary, or did you want to come back in to do the summary? I can do the summary as well.
Can people hear me?
Yes.
Okay, this is just a summary of what we said. Any crossings will be limited to the existing area disturbance over that easement. The Delma will preserve the 6-mile aqueduct archaeological easement. Existing hotel will be replaced with a dormitory for 560 students. By the way, I understand they're currently using Crystal Suites to house COVID students that had to be quarantined. I was asked by SHPO to go in and take some inside pictures, and I informed them I couldn't get in there to take the inside pictures. So I think they're doing with my outside pictures. By the way, we made an application to SHPO to get their consent here. We think it'll be issued. They just asked to document the existing building before it's demolished. And the Washington Area Corridor, the applicant is willing to participate in funding. It's talked about in that study as being a mix of grants and private public funding, and we're obviously willing to participate as the private portion. That's my presentation. I'm prepared to answer any questions which anybody may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschberg. Are there any questions of the board?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions about going back to the easement. Could you talk about the limits of disturbance along that easement? What you are and are not allowed to do on or above the easement?
The rule was we established a corridor that identified on this plan on that on the 7th slide is probably the best place to look. Or back up one. No, there, that one's probably the best one to look at. This was identified because we actually had to get below grade to get in there. Oops. Don't want to. That hatched area, because we had to get sewer and water into it. So that had to be disturbed below the grades of the archaeological easement. For the driveway, once we establish that grade, we're not allowed to regrade anything. So what we do with our paving, we show that area to be repaved. We're not going to cut anything out of it. We're just going to mill up the existing pavement and put down asphalt. So we're not going to address anything subsurface in that area. By the way, when they dug the trenches for the sewer and water mains, we had an archaeologist from Harkin Associates on board. They actually went along with it to make sure that if any artifacts were uncovered, they'd recover them.
So in that circumstance, are you allowed to use the easement for like picnic area or a patio or any sort of open space that would be part of the development?
I'm not certain. Again, the easement we granted didn't make any reference to other uses of it. And quite honestly, it's not on our property. It's on the adjoining property. It's only on our property for our 106-foot width in there. And I suppose there is actually a lawn area west of the easement that might be used, but it's on some, when we get beyond that, it goes over to somebody else's property. So we haven't thought about doing it because we thought that we try to preserve it. I don't know that having a picnic table there or anything else would lead to any non-preservation of it. But the city of Albany, who has that easement, I think would have to grant us the right to do that.
So this is a type of conservation easement. So I would say that any use that would, impede the archaeological preservation would not be permitted. I mean, a picnic table, perhaps, assuming that it's something that's completely movable. But generally, I think the idea behind this is to conserve it as much as possible.
So I recognize this next question may be rather pie and this may be rather unusual. Does an easement like this include air rights? Is it impossible for the applicant to build over the easement without disturbing the easement?
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I have an answer to it.
If I'm unmuted, there's also the parallel water easement, and we cannot build over that one because we tried. So even if we could build over the archaeological easement, we're also hemmed in by the sewer easement. So we could build over part of it at best case, but never connect the two sides.
Could you go to that that slide where you have the little building? It's kind of thumbnail sketched in.
Yeah. No, go later on, Luis, about
Yeah.
right down there,
There
that
you
one
go.
right there. No, the next one.
Next one. Okay, so you are, if we can go to that one. So as I'm looking at this, we have the limits of the building to, it would be the east, if I'm looking at this correctly. There's a yellow shaded area. Imagine, is that a dumpster or stairwell?
Stairwell.
Okay. So immediately adjacent to the stairwell to the west is the blue shaded area that represents the sewer easement, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, that's,
And you are prohibited from building any structure above that easement?
yes.
Right.
Okay. And that's the water board's prohibition, or is that another requirement?
Well, we had thought of doing it before.
Mhm.
We wanted to encroach on it slightly and have a building elevated to the second floor going across it. And we were advised that we could not do that. They didn't want any building over their easement. So, you know, if they had to dig it up, they may be able to do it with smaller equipment, but they really don't like anything over the top of it.
I think you're understanding what I'm asking, and I'm going to hold up a crude drawing. Is what my question was, is if this was an illustration of the easement here, could you, I don't know if cantilever is the right term, put the building
Bridge.
up to be a bridge, or to put housing up there to maximize the opportunity for space? I'm sorry, I'm not Picasso here. Actually, this is probably more Picasso than anything else. And actually be able to utilize that space in the front of the building to continue the use. But what you're saying is that sewer easement, which is right adjacent to the building, this is very
Right.
when it's reversed, you're not able to build over.
Correct.
Correct.
We would have liked to do that, but we cannot.
All right. I think that's an important thing to supplement the record, saying that that's an additional thing that constrains you from being able to take advantage of building over the easement.
Yeah. And on the archaeological easement, I don't know. I have to go back and search the record. Some of what we're saving is the visual impact of seeing the berm. And I don't know whether or not building a building over it would preserve that. So again, it's a moot question because we can't get to the building anyway. You know, the thought of doing a principal use that had frontage on the road would require us to bridge it over there, or the principal use would still be 107 feet back because it's not, you know, it's defined as a principal use, and the smaller building I don't think might also be a principal use being by definition, but it certainly wouldn't meet the need of having both 10 feet off the street line.
Yep. If it was considered the principal use, then the other building would have to be accessory to it and would have to look visually as a supporting structure as opposed to a principal structure. Correct.
Okay. I don't have any more questions at this moment, so I'm going to hit mute. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions by the board? And thank you, applicants, for discussing the flying bridge. We don't have a lot of those in Albany, but it would have added to the historic character of the area, since I think most of our flying bridges are relatively old, except for the one with the convention center over by the Empire State Plaza. So are there, Luis, are there any members of the public who would like to speak for or against this project?
At this time, if panelists or attendees, if you're able to, or if you're looking to discuss this case or enter comments, just raise your hand using the menu, and then we can call on you. I don't have any dial-in members or attendees, so we should all be able to just simply raise a hand if you wanted to make a comment. Don't appear we have anyone signing up for comments.
Thank you, Luis. In that case, then, I'd like to hold this case over while we await some of the supplementation that Mr. Daly had requested to give us a little bit more for the record on the inability to build aerially over the water / sewer easement, and perhaps a brief discussion of the principal versus accessory use issue that was brought up too. So we'll hold this over. We can discuss those issues at the next workshop, and hopefully we can take action on this at the next meeting afterward. Mr. Hirschberg, is there any connection of financing for the project to getting it done by or before the end of the year?
Well, our goal was to get back on the planning board for site plan review approval. We submitted all our final documents, but schedule-wise, if we could get it done by the end of the year, we'd appreciate it. But again, I know there's a hitch in some of your schedule, so I would. Is it not? It's not critical waiting for grants, but it is critical to be certain that we keep the my client and the financing people comfortable.
Understood.
The other pressure is to hit the next school year, so it's less of a financing issue than simply being ready to open in time for the start of school for the 2022 school year.
Got it. And are there any connections between a deadline for breaking ground on the building to either any tax advantages that may come from leaving the conservation easement undisturbed, or any things of that nature, or is it really just trying to make it in time for the 2022 school year?
Yeah, our goal is to make it ready for the 2022 school year, which means an early spring breaking ground. So, again,
I'm not aware of anything else.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll hold this over, and we'll anticipate getting some supplementation that we'll be able to look at the workshop. And then I'll talk to the chair of the planning board, since we haven't done our monthly chats in a while. And we'll discuss what the timing is on that end too. And we'll anticipate seeing you again, hopefully, before the end of the year. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so the next case is 255 Clinton Avenue, also represented by Dan Hirschberg. Dan, whenever you're ready, you can start that.
Okay, this variance is required because the number of parking spaces on the lot known as 255 permitted, it's a 3-unit building, would be 3 spaces. We're asking for 38 spaces on the revamped 255. The revamped 255 was actually originally 5 homes that had been previously demolished before home leasing got involved. But meanwhile, that was combined into a single parcel. In order to provide enough parking to satisfy what we identified as a neighborhood requirement, the neighborhood really thinks that on-street parking has diminished now that home leasing is renting up their units. And that's true, actually, because I believe that when these units were first developed in the early 1900s, cars weren't an issue. Even when a number rehabbed in 1974, the number of people driving there was somewhat less than now. So we admit that home leasing is having an impact on available street parking compared to the way they were before they undertook the rehabilitation of 70 units. If you go to the next slide, Louise, I think this is the photo, and our site is there. And actually, if that site arrow had moved across, it goes all behind those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buildings adjoining it. So that is the site that we're talking about. Go to the next one. And this is a plan, and it shows we have a green area in the middle. We'll have some benches, some picnic tables. We're going to shield the parking lot with a decorative wrought iron fence with landscaping behind it. Where we have landscaping, we have a retaining wall and landscaping over most of the back line. The area to the left with some landscape around it is for snow storage. And the 38 parking spots are spread out. They're over each unit, and the way home leasing intends to have this available is available for any of their tenants, which means essentially, although the residents of these buildings might use it, also residents of other buildings that home leasing has rehabilitated and are rented out could use the site too. Next. We believe that the main public variance is, public benefit is of this requested variance is the fact is that at a public hearing for the project at 163 Clinton Avenue, which is down the block, a couple blocks down the way, the president of Sheridan Hollow Neighborhood Association and Arbor Hill Concerned Citizens and 2 or 3 of the residents spoke. They really concerned that as the 70 rehabilitated buildings become occupied, that is becoming more difficult to find on-street parking near the residents. So in an attempt to do that, we thought originally that we may be able to combine 255 and 271 into a single new lot that would be permitted to have 38 parking spots. Can you go to the next slide, please? And would the character neighborhood be affected? It may have originally been a solid row of homes in there, but since that time, other parking lots are in there, and they're all within a block or 2 each direction, starting at 360 for the mosque and 104 Clinton Avenue. There's a new housing down there, which has a significantly sized parking lot. There are other smaller parking lots. There are additional parking for single cars exist on these blocks. They're essentially where one building's been demolished and a single car or sometimes 2 cars can fit in to serve one of the adjoining buildings. Sometimes they got titled to it. Sometimes I think these things just go up over time. And the question was asked at the workshop, how many of these are permitted? And I have no idea. I know the one at 104 Clinton Avenue is permitted because we did that site design for rehabilitation services. So rehabilitation support services, the tenant there. But I can't tell you historically how many of these parking lots are permitted or have they just occurred. Next. Alternatives considered. The first alternative considered was combining all the lots, but it turned out that all these buildings, every one of the buildings involved here received historic tax credits, and the historic tax credit numbers are listed below. And historic tax credits have a life of their own. There's certain restrictions on using them, and grants were permitted, were given for these projects. Different financings arranged for these projects, primarily HRC grants, and we would have to change all those grants, and there's a chance that we would lose some of the grant money if we tried to combine all those lots. We just don't think it's a feasible thing to do. If the one is a compliant site, would just be to provide the 3 parking spots, but this would not do much to relieve the shorting on-street parking in this area. Next. This is a summary of how we arrived at 38. We took all of the units there. There are some with office units, a shop, a laundromat. We totaled all those up, and we came up with a total of 33 required parking. Of course, these were rehabilitated buildings, so the parking was not provided when they were granted their permits. So we figured that we would apply for the 15% overage that the planning board could permit, and that would get us up to 38. And that's how we arrived at our goal to build 38 parking spots. And although the number is huge, if you take a look at it as compared to what we could do if we could have combined these lots, it is not numerically substantial difference. It's no difference. Next. The question was asked if we showed the entire site as as having a green space that exceeded the 30% required, because 70% is the maximum impervious area. So we were asked, what would these do if we took them separately? And six of the units would actually be less than 30% green, some by a small amount. The largest one is 4.5% over. The smallest one is 1.8% over. So again, we do not meet that requirement. Individual lots taken by itself. So again, if you take them all together, it's 53.9%. But if you take them individually, there are some that are over 70%. Next. Oh, go back. I'm done. I'm prepared to answer any questions which the board may have. And I think Adam Driscoll and Brett Garwood from Home Leasing are available in case the question exceeds my capability to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Hirschberg. And are there any questions of the board?
I've got a couple of, if people don't mind me going first again.
Please.
Have at it, Martin.
So thank you. One of my concerns is when you bring up the impervious area, because this application is not for impervious lot coverage, and these are all treated as separate tax lots, correct?
So I guess we're asking for a variance of the.
I mean, to me, if they're separate tax lots,
Yep.
each lot would necessitate a variance if you're looking for a percentage over the maximum coverage. I don't see any other way around that, because this is being treated as separate tax lots. And so if we're entertained, if the board is being asked to weigh in on something that would ultimately violate from a lot coverage perspective, I don't see how we can move forward with that request unless those numbers are tightened up. That's my first comment and question.
Well, again, you're correct. We would have to apply for 7 variances, the one on the total number of parking spaces and separate 6 variances for the 70%. We took a look at tightening them up. Again, we wanted to leave the sidewalk parallel the parking for convenience of people. If we took that off, we could come closer and probably only need 2 or 3 variances. The ones that are 74, 74.1, and 74.5, we could probably get the ones that are 1.8, 2.5, and 2.8% over. We could probably get those down by.
Yeah, I'm sure staff could work with you to try to sharpen those numbers up to the use of alternative stormwater management methods like porous pavement or something, but I'll leave that to them. The second question I have is, one of the constraints the board has is ensuring that the minimum variance necessary is requested. On one of your slides, you demonstrated the capacity for parking was supported by required parking spaces for each of the uses, and you came up with 33 parking spaces, and then applied a 15% overage that the planning board is eligible to provide. That 15% seems to be within the wiggle room of over the minimum variance that would be necessary to support the uses, and that would be a concern, that those 5 spaces are what seems to me is clearly above and beyond the minimum variance that might be necessary to support the demand for this facility. The third item I have, and that's more of a comment, I guess, that I'll let you respond to. But one of the greater concerns I have is that this lot, because it spans multiple individual tax lots, could present an issue down the road if these lots are somehow subdivided, or they're put up for sale, or there's a dispute about parking. All of a sudden we've created one entity, one parking lot that is assembled from all these parts that just programmatically seems difficult to manage if something goes awry in this. And I don't know if that's something that legal could weigh in on, whether there is an easement that could be placed on top of it to better tie these parcels together for the purpose of parking. But it seems to me that mechanism would be necessary to protect this from blowing up later down the road.
Yeah, our plan does show a proposed easement going over the lots, and we could work with Corporation Counsel's office to word it to the satisfaction of the board regarding we protected. Obviously, shared parking and shared driveway is always somewhat problematic if people don't live by the terms of the agreement. And obviously, the city doesn't get involved in enforcement, so it's a private project where somebody else has to probably go to legal methods to have the easement enforced. But
right, I love the shared parking arrangement, but it's got to be something that's that is lock solid when it comes to the property owners being able to enforce. But those are the three concerns I had: was the impervious area, the minimizing the variance, and the legal mechanism to tie these together. Yeah,
we could work on the impervious area. We take a look at it. Although porous pavement doesn't work really because no infiltration into the groundwater, we could use some porous pavement with an underdrain underneath it, which would meet the need of having it, because the stone underneath the porous pavement would store the stormwater and let it out slowly after the storm subsides.
Yeah.
We could do something like that. And 33 versus 38, the applicant would still be interested in getting to 33. 33 is a lot more than 3.
We are constrained to minimize the variance request. I mean, Rich,
okay,
broken record that needs to be played. So it's one thing the board will be considering.
Okay.
Are there any further questions of the board?
I have a question. So did you, I think you mentioned that there would be a different number of spots that would be allowed if you looked at all the properties as one unit, as one property.
Yeah.
But how many spots are allowed in that case? Do you know?
It would be permitted for 33. And as Martin mentioned, I had tacked on another 15%, which is the maximum the planning board can approve without us coming for a parking number variance. But as he correctly pointed out, the board's obligation is to try to minimize the variance. So if you go back to the table on one slide back, I think that one right there. This is the number of parking spots. Each, when you have 3 units, required parking is 3. 259 has a 1,400 square foot office, which is required 4, and it also has 4 residential units. So that's 8. And the next one is an 800 square foot shop, which requires 2, and every unit requires 1. So that's how the computation was done. Those are the 8 buildings that comprise the project. And so the total required is 33. I inadvertently said the total requested is 38 because we were trying to take advantage of the 15% variance that the planning board can grant us.
But I think when we were looking at this, you said that if the properties were all merged into one, then the required parking would be different, no?
No, that's what this is to display, that if this was one parcel and we had all those units on it, the required parking would be 33.
Okay.
So what I was saying there is that because we couldn't combine them, we can't come in and say we don't need a variance because we've got our 33 parking spots.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. Okay.
That's why we are where we are.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions of the board? Let me go back and ask a question or two then. So I think following up on one of Martin's questions, has the developer examined, and I think you mentioned an easement, Mr. Hirschberg, but have you examined any kind of restrictive covenant that would be put on any deeds that would issue from this if it was at some point in the future split up and sold off to individuals?
Yeah, our goal would be separate and apart from that is to file an easement that would affect all the parcels. Obviously, the mortgagees would have a right to We probably need to release a mortgage from those people who file it, but I don't think they have a problem. And that would be meant to go with all the deeds. There would not be a new deed required for each one, but essentially all the addresses would be identified in that document. And when future sales took place, it could be referred in. But right now, we're sort of locked in with the conveyances that have taken place now. So we were thinking of filing a separate document describing usages, who's responsible for what happens if the sale takes place. Right now, home leasing owns them all, or elements that home leasing has control over. If it turns out to be something else, we'll define what has to be done.
And thank you. You anticipated some of my follow-up, which is it the intention of home leasing to own these in common and operate them for any period of time? Or alternately, is that a requirement of getting any of the historic credits that you're getting?
Again, the historic credits time out after a time, and that's primarily the credits to take care of the financing. Home leasing has indicated they intend to hold these buildings, all 70 of them, unless some situation comes up with one or two of them, and make them part of their portfolio. As their name implies, they're into leasing, and they intend to stay. They've got a big presence now in the city of Albany, and I think we're working to expand it with a couple other projects we're working on them in the city.
And just to add to that, there's a regulatory agreement with our funding that is in place for, I believe, 50 years.
Thank you. That's what I was getting to, because much of the time these deals with the state are conditioned upon fairly lengthy periods of time. Okay.
Yeah. Well, if that happens, I turned 80 yesterday. I'll have to be 130 before the leases expire.
You'll get there, Dan. You'll still be working too.
So we better finish the
Your
deal.
clients will never let you
leave.
They'll never let you leave.
Yeah. So I would think, and this is a suggestion for our counsel, Amy, that the Corporation Counsel Office discuss with the applicant both an easement to maintain the ability of the residents or eventually owners to get in and out of their spots at some point, however many spots are granted by the board. But there might also be some discussion of a restrictive covenant so that whatever arrangement is reached for the spots, the people can't then subsequently do other things with them at some point in the future. And having home leasing own all the property in common allows them to add a restrictive covenant in a manner that's consistent with law.
You could make that as a condition of granting the variance. I certainly don't want to get too involved in determining, the wording of any private restrictions on the property, but these are fairly standard things that I don't think it would be a problem to get them.
Yeah, and we don't need an answer to that now, but I think that that's worth doing just to maintain the value and if the project is good, to maintain the project. So that was one thing. The second thing is, and I'll go back to what Martin was saying, which is, Mr. Hirschberg, could you talk to what the applicant has attempted to do at this point to try and minimize the variance that they're asking for?
Well, again, a question was raised when we were doing 163 Clinton Avenue about whether or not we can enter into shared parking agreements. And Adam and Brett have tried to find partners with that. They're unable to find anybody with significant parking that was willing to enter into shared parking agreements with them. But probably, given the number of units they're building and the number of units that are coming on board, if they could arrange shared parking under reasonable terms, I'm sure they would, because there's an advantage for them to have more parking. Right now, there are some people from New York State that still park here, but not nearly as many as parked there when New York State had full offices. And the people said when that comes about, more people will be parking here from state offices. There are not an awful lot of state offices that are conveniently close to this, but people don't mind walking a half a mile after they park their car if they don't have to pay a parking fee. So all those things come into play. So home leasing continues to view potential shared parking arrangements, and if they come up with anything, they'd head those off. But we still think that to provide for the parking that's needed for this area directly, and with a few extra parking spots to allow other people from the areas park here, I think this is the minimum amount that we think we can justify needing.
And just to add to that as well, we're working on a phase 2 project, and part of that is to build across the street where the vacant parcel is 36 additional units, and there is parking with that new construction. But we were anticipating if there is a need to be able to have those folks be able to park across the street as well, just as an added relief if there was the need for that circumstance.
Yeah, one of the problems with doing a parking demand on the Center for Economic Development is the developer there. Actually, their home leasing handle the housing portion, and they occasionally do have, or maybe even more than occasionally, they do have meetings where people come in. Their normal workload for the startup companies isn't very high, but when they have a large get together of people involved, it sometimes needs more parking. So they have a variable parking demand, and the variable parking demand doesn't work very well with housing because the housing is fairly constant. Every night you want to park your car and take it out in the morning, pretty much.
Thank you.
Certainly.
Was there any requirement by the fire department to leave room for access behind the buildings to make it more possible to fight fires, not only on that property, but on the ones around it?
Yeah, there normally isn't, because as row houses, that was built to the code that existed then, that, the one side access is all that's required. However, actually there'd be, if a fire truck is willing to back up, there's plenty of space to get back there and fight these houses from the rear or even houses adjoining it. But I don't think from a fire code standpoint, these things the buildings that were built all met the fire code.
Thank you. And similarly, was there any request by the city of Albany, I'm sorry, by Bill Trudeau, trying to remember what his title was, but were there any requests for traffic safety or loading these streets with the additional cars that would come in and out, with either your total requested or with the smaller 33 units possibility? Yeah,
the plan was submitted to Bill Trudeau as part of the package we submitted to the planning office. I haven't heard any comments from them. It's been used for a driveway for quite a while Home Depot had both their leasing office and their construction office on that site. So I don't think there are any specific problems. He may want some signage either side of it, but I don't anticipate any problems.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions from the board for now?
There's a comment from Louise McNeil Lee.
Yes, I saw that in chat, but are there any questions from the board members first? No? In that case, Louise, do we have anyone who wishes to speak in favor or to oppose the project besides Louise?
If there's anyone in the attendees list who would wish to provide comment for this case, if you could just press the raise hand button or mention it in the chat. Does not appear to be anyone making it known that they would like to provide comments.
In that case, although we don't, I guess this is one of our new moments of learning, or a teachable moment. Louise, could you read Ms. McNeely's post in the chat, since that doesn't actually enter into the record in any way, shape, or form that I'm aware of?
Sure. So the attendee, Louise McNeely, provided a comment stating, through Sheridan Hollow Brownfield opportunity planning, the neighbors have made it very clear that increased parking is a priority, especially as new developments are undertaken. The parking across the street will be used by the existing organizations. There are not enough spots now for the incubator tenants.
Thank you. Does that trigger any additional questions by any members of the board for the applicant? No? In that case, Mr. Hirschberg, would you like to take a rebuttal against that comment from the outside?
No, again, I think the incubator parking is a separate entity, and we're working with the applicant there to be certain that they're maximizing the parking and find, they're also looking for additional parking spaces. So we think that project sort of stands on its own needs. It has parking on Orange Street. We have some street side parking on Clinton Avenue in front of our site. But I think that project will meet its needs eventually before the buildings get occupied. They're working hard to find additional parking. And I say that's primarily for the incubator companies, but not the normal operation of the incubator companies is fine. But like I said, when they have groups there, they have learning sessions, they have groups of new applicants come in. So at that point there, they need more parking. And I think they're seriously looking at additional sites for it.
Thank you. Let me ask you a further question or two. As I asked the last applicants, are there any connections between the funding that the project has received or is about to receive and attempting to get it done by the end of 2020?
I don't think there's any funding application. Adam can correct me if I'm wrong. This is strictly an add-on. We weren't required to do it for the HRC grant projects, and I think it would be a benefit for them, but I don't think there's any problem there, and I think we've missed the opportunity to pave it this year anyway, so I'll speak for Adam and Brett that if we miss the first of the year slightly, that'd be okay, because we're probably not going to break ground on it until March or April.
There isn't any funding requirement involved with it. If the stars had aligned, we were our construction for the 70 buildings, which I'm excited to say, it seems like it has been a very long process, will be complete for the 70 buildings, most likely the end of November. And again, if the stars had been able to align, we were hoping to be able to have everything wrapped up and complete. And I think the asphalt plants don't close till roughly the end of November, but that was the only item that we had as a possible to have construction completed, because then they'll have to return probably in the spring if we were approved.
Thank you. I'd like to hold this case over too, so that we can receive the supplementation that was requested, and then also so that the applicant can have a chance to talk briefly with the Corporation Council as to what options there might be to protect the ongoing value of any parking spaces that are granted by the board for subsequent owners and renters and for the neighborhood as a whole. So whether that is through easements or restrictive covenants on deeds or any other sort of legal mechanism that is sensible and appropriate for the project and is consistent with the city's idea of what the greatest value is to the neighborhood, I think that would be very useful to have before us too. If you can get it to us in time for our next meeting, that is our next workshop, we can discuss the supplementation then in an open meeting format and address whatever we can in our upcoming meetings.
Okay.
Do you need to go to the planning board too for any discussion about any of the things that you've presented tonight, or are you completely done with that process?
we're done with it now. We still haven't gotten final review by the Department of Water Supply. We were proposing to put a private storage facility on site, and the Department of Water Supply may be heading towards us or Home Leasing making a contribution towards a larger project rather than building a smaller project here. That's how the stormwater was handled for the other 70 units that were built. They didn't do on-site stormwater systems because they were, very small systems, which actually are difficult to maintain and become more difficult to gain the use of. So again, their goal here would be to arrive at a financial contribution for a major stormwater project, which there are a lot of them on the books for the city of Albany.
Good, thank you. In that case, we hope to see some further documentation from you in time for our next workshop. And we appreciate your presentation tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
At this point, Luis, we're just on the pending agenda. Is that correct?
Oh, that's correct. And 53 Pinewood has also indicated that they would like to request their interest in the variance. However, the board can still make any motion that they would like regarding the rehearing, independent of that.
So they have withdrawn their request for the variance. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay. In that case, we had suggested that we would discuss and potentially consider a motion for a rehearing tonight if the applicant is uninterested in getting the variance. I'm not sure I see much point, but since you made the motion, Martin, do you wish to discuss or have any concerns?
No, but since we already took a motion, should I make a motion to withdraw my prior motion? I mean, like, how does this work?
Yes, please, just for make Robert's Rules of Order happy.
Yeah, I'll make a motion to withdraw my prior motion requesting a rehearing on 53 Pinewood Avenue.
Thank you. Can I get a second?
Second.
Second. All those in favor of withdrawing the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you. So that is motion to remove motion passes. What else do we have on board, Luis?
36 Judson Street.
Thank you. And it's my belief that there is no action on that, and we'll continue to hold it on pending until we get some kind of update from the appellants and respondents.
Okay. That concludes our agenda.
Thank you, and thank all of you, and especially Denard. I can't see him, he's off the edge of my screen now. Congratulations in advance, and we look forward to you doing great things in your next position, Denard.
Awesome. Have a good one, guys.
Thank you all, and have a good night.
Thank
I'll
you.
now bring this meeting to a close.